Ambassador Sarah Chun adjusted her formal diplomatic robes as the sleek alien transport descended through the crimson atmosphere of Zelthra Prime. The massive city below sparkled with bioluminescent towers that twisted skyward like frozen lightning. After 3 years of negotiations, humanity was finally being invited to join the Galactic Trade Consortium, a moment that would change Earth's destiny forever. Remarkable architecture, Sarah murmured to her aide, Marcus, who was busy reviewing the final treaty documents on his holographic display. The Zelthran Empire has truly mastered organic engineering. Marcus nodded, though his expression remained tense. Just remember, Ambassador, the Zelthrans may have invited us, but half the consortium still sees humans as primitives. One wrong move, and 3 years of work disappears. Sarah understood the weight on her shoulders. Humanity had spent decades proving they deserved a place among the galactic civilizations. Their technology was impressive, their military capable, but they were still the newcomers in a galaxy where some species had been spacefaring for millennia. This treaty would grant Earth access to advanced technologies, new trade routes, and protection under consortium law. The transport touched down on a landing pad that seemed to be made of living coral, its surface rippling gently under their weight. Through the transparent walls, Sarah could see dozens of alien species moving about their business. Tall, graceful Eltherians with their crystal blue skin glided past stocky Cormac traders, whose rocky hides gleamed in the alien sunlight. The diversity was breathtaking. Ambassador Chun, came a melodious voice as they disembarked. A Zelthran official approached, her 6 arms moving in an intricate greeting pattern. Her butterfly-like wings shimmered with shifting patterns of color. Welcome to Zelthra Prime. The High Council awaits your presence. Sarah returned the greeting as she had practiced, her 2 human arms feeling inadequate compared to the Zelthran's elegant movements. The honor is mine, Coordinator. Humanity is grateful for this opportunity. As they traveled through the city on a floating platform, Sarah marveled at the sights around them. Buildings that seemed to grow from the ground itself, transportation systems that flowed like living rivers, and everywhere the gentle hum of technology, so advanced it seemed like magic. This was the future she was fighting to secure for humanity. The council chamber was a massive spherical room with no apparent up or down. Representatives from dozens of species floated on individual platforms arranged in complex geometric patterns. Sarah's platform positioned her near the center, where she could address the assembly. The weight of thousands of alien eyes upon her was almost overwhelming. Honored counselors, Sarah began, her voice amplified by translation devices that rendered her words in dozens of languages simultaneously. I come before you today not just as a representative of Earth, but as a voice for the potential that lies within every sentient species. Humanity may be young in the cosmic scale, but we bring unique perspectives, innovative solutions, and an unbreakable spirit of cooperation. The presentation went flawlessly. Sarah outlined humanity's contributions to science, their peaceful intentions, and their eagerness to learn from their galactic neighbors. She could see approval in the body language of many representatives, even among species whose expressions she couldn't fully read. But as the session concluded and delegates began filing out, Sarah noticed something troubling. A group of beings in dark, form-fitting suits had positioned themselves near the exit points. They moved with predatory grace, and something about their presence made her skin crawl. Coordinator Vyasa, Sarah approached the Zelthran official. Who are those individuals in the dark suits? Means nervously. Representatives of the Kythera Syndicate. They handle certain aspects of interspecies labor relations. The euphemism sent chills down Sarah's spine. She had read classified intelligence reports about the Kythera Syndicate during her preparation. They were slavers, operating in the gray areas between consortium worlds where law enforcement was limited. But surely they wouldn't dare operate openly at a diplomatic gathering? Ambassador, Marcus whispered urgently. We should return to our quarters. Something feels wrong. Sarah nodded, but as they moved toward the exit, the Kythera agents shifted to intercept them. Their leader, a tall humanoid with pale gray skin and completely black eyes, stepped forward. Ambassador Chun. His voice was smooth, almost hypnotic. I am Operative Vextor of the Kythera Syndicate. We have a proposition for you. I'm afraid any proposals must go through proper diplomatic channels, Sarah replied firmly. If you'll excuse us, I think you misunderstand. Vextor's smile revealed rows of sharp teeth. This is not a request. Suddenly, the air around them shimmered, and Sarah felt her muscles seize up, some kind of neural disruptor field. She watched helplessly as Marcus collapsed, his body convulsing. Around them, other delegates continued their conversations, apparently unaware of what was happening. Perception filter, Vextor explained casually as his agents moved in. Very useful for discrete operations. The humans have such interesting neural patterns. Our clients will pay handsomely for specimens of your species. Sarah tried to scream, to fight, to do anything, but her body refused to obey. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Coordinator HFY watching from across the chamber, her wings folded in what Sarah now recognized as shame. When Sarah awoke, she was in a holding cell aboard what was clearly a slave ship. The walls were rough metal, stained with substances she preferred not to identify. The smell of fear and despair hung heavy in the recycled air. Through the electromagnetic bars, she could see other cells containing beings from dozens of species. "You're awake," came a voice from the cell across from hers. Sarah looked up to see a Cormac female, her rocky skin scarred and dulled from captivity. "Ye mitraknid. I've been here 3 cycles. 3 months." Sarah asked, though she suspected the answer would be worse. 3 years, Thraknell corrected grimly. The Kithira don't just sell slaves. They break them first, make them compliant. The process takes time. Sarah felt her blood chill. They can't do this. I'm a diplomatic representative. There will be consequences. A bitter laugh echoed from another cell. They all say that at first, said a voice that sounded almost human. Sarah turned to see a being that shared many features with humans, but had distinctly alien proportions. I am Krellon of the vegan colonies. I was an ambassador too. My people searched for me for 2 years before giving up. The full horror of her situation began to sink in. Sarah wasn't just captured. She was disappeared. The Kithira operated in the spaces between civilized worlds, in regions where even the consortium's authority was limited. Her captors clearly had experience in making important people vanish without a trace. What about ransom? Sarah asked desperately. Surely they could get more money by returning me than by selling me. The Kithira don't think in simple terms, Thraknell explained. Breaking a human diplomat sends a message to the galaxy. It shows that no one is beyond their reach. Fear is more valuable than any ransom. Over the following days, Sarah learned the grim reality of the Kithira Syndicate's operation. The ship, called the Harvester, was a mobile processing center that traveled between the Outer Rim worlds. Slaves were captured, broken, trained, and then sold to buyers across the galaxy. The operation was vast, sophisticated, and apparently untouchable. The Kithira used a combination of drugs, neural conditioning, and psychological torture to break their victims. Sarah watched in horror as other prisoners were taken for processing and returned as hollow shells of their former selves. The being who had once been a proud warrior would shuffle past with dead eyes, responding only to direct commands. But Sarah noticed something else during her captivity. The Kithira seemed particularly interested in her. While other prisoners were processed immediately, she was kept in isolation, studied, observed. Vextor visited her cell regularly, asking questions about human psychology, human culture, human weaknesses. "Your species fascinates us," he said during one visit. "So much potential, yet so naive about the realities of galactic politics. Tell me, Ambassador, what do you think your people will do when they realize you've vanished?" "They'll look for me," Sarah replied with more confidence than she felt. "Earth doesn't abandon its people. But how they find you? We've covered our tracks perfectly. As far as the galaxy knows, you completed your diplomatic mission and departed for a cultural exchange on Rigel 7. Your ship's records will show that you never arrived. Lost in hyperspace, perhaps. These things happen to primitive civilizations still learning galactic navigation." Sarah's heart sank as she realized the sophistication of the Kithira's planning. They hadn't simply kidnapped her on impulse. This had been carefully orchestrated, probably from the moment humanity had applied for consortium membership. "But here's what your people don't understand," Vextor continued, his black eyes gleaming. "The galaxy is not the peaceful federation your diplomats imagine. It's a marketplace where everything has a price, including freedom. The strong prey upon the weak, and the clever profit from both. Your species will learn this lesson, one way or another. Days blended into weeks as Sarah endured the psychological pressure of captivity. The Kithira didn't physically torture her, not yet, but the constant threat, the witnessing of other prisoners suffering, and the gradual erosion of hope were torture enough. She watched proud beings reduced to cowering slaves, their spirits broken as surely as their bodies. But Sarah held on to one thought that sustained her through the darkest moments. Earth didn't give up on its people. Somewhere out there, she knew, people were looking for her. The question was whether they would find her before the Kithira completed their work. Late one night, as Sarah lay on the hard metal floor of her cell, trying to sleep, she heard something that made her heart skip. A sound that didn't belong on a slave ship, the barely audible whisper of movement in the ventilation system above. Most prisoners wouldn't have noticed it, but Sarah had grown hypersensitive to every sound during her captivity. She remained perfectly still, feigning sleep, as the subtle movements continued overhead. Whatever was up, there was moving with incredible stealth, avoiding the motion detectors that she knew monitored the ship's systems. After what felt like hours, the sounds faded, leaving Sarah to wonder if she had imagined them. The next morning brought a surprise. During the daily meal distribution, she noticed that one of the guard stations was unmanned. The Kithira were never that careless. As the day progressed, more small anomalies appeared. A door that should have been locked stood slightly ajar. A surveillance camera that had been tracking prisoners now pointed at the wall. But the Kithira themselves seemed unaware of these subtle changes. They went about their brutal routine with the same casual efficiency, processing more prisoners, preparing others for sale. Sarah began to hope that her imagination hadn't deceived her the night before. That hope was confirmed when she found a small piece of metal in her food, a tiny fragment that had been carefully shaped into a recognizable symbol. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized it. The insignia of Earth's Special Operations Division. Someone from home was here. The message was clear even without words. Hold on. Help is coming. For the first time since her capture, Sarah allowed herself to truly believe that she might see Earth again. But she also knew that whoever had infiltrated the ship faced impossible odds. The Kithira were experienced, well-armed, and paranoid. Their ship was a fortress designed to keep prisoners in and rescuers out. Yet as she clutched the tiny metal symbol in her palm, Sarah felt a surge of pride in her species. Humanity might be young and naive about galactic politics, but they possessed something that many older civilizations had lost: the absolute refusal to abandon their own. Somewhere in the darkness of the ship, a human operative was risking everything to bring her home. The Kithira had wanted to send a message by breaking a human diplomat. They were about to learn that humanity had messages of their own to send. Commander Jake Morrison had been many things in his 43 years. Marine Force Recon, CIA operative, and for the last decade, one of Earth's most lethal special operations agents. But he had never been a ghost in an alien slave ship, moving through ventilation shafts barely wide enough for his enhanced frame, hunting slavers who had made the mistake of taking one of his people. The mission had started 6 weeks ago when Ambassador Sarah Chen's transport had simply vanished. Official channels claimed she had departed for a cultural exchange, but the intelligence community knew better. Sarah was too careful, too experienced to simply disappear without a trace. When her scheduled check-ins stopped coming, Earth's Special Operations Division had been quietly activated. Jake had volunteered immediately. He had worked with Sarah during the Mars colony crisis 5 years earlier, and he respected her dedication to humanity's future. More importantly, he possessed the specific skill set needed for this type of mission: infiltration, assassination, and the ability to operate completely alone in hostile territory for extended periods. The tracking had taken weeks. The Kithira Syndicate covered their trails expertly, but they hadn't counted on human persistence and ingenuity. Earth's quantum computers had analyzed billions of hyperspace traffic patterns, looking for anomalies. The breakthrough had come when they detected gravitational distortions consistent with an unregistered vessel traveling between the outer rim worlds. Now Jake clung to the hull of the Harvester as it dropped out of hyperspace near a desolate asteroid field. His adaptive camouflage suit rendered him nearly invisible against the ship's dark metal surface, while his suit's systems interfaced with the ship's external sensors, creating blind spots in their detection grid. Getting aboard had required patience, precision, and no small amount of luck. The ship was larger than intelligence had estimated, nearly 2 kilometers long and heavily armed. Through his suit's sensors, Jake could detect hundreds of life signs scattered throughout the vessel. Most were in the lower levels, probably the slave-holding areas. The Kythera crew occupied the upper sections, while the middle decks appeared to be processing and conditioning facilities. Jake had spent 3 days mapping the ship's internal structure, moving only during sleep cycles when most of the crew was inactive. The ventilation system was his highway. Designed for maintenance drones, it was just barely large enough for a human to crawl through. His modified physiology helped. The genetic enhancements that made him faster, stronger, and more resilient than baseline humans also made him more flexible. He had already eliminated 6 guards, but so carefully that their deaths looked like accidents or equipment failures. The Kythera were paranoid, but not particularly imaginative. They had extensive security against frontal assault or prisoner uprising, but they had never considered that someone might infiltrate their ship and wage a one-man war from within. Jake's target was the command deck, but first he needed to locate Sarah. His suit's passive sensors could distinguish human life signs from other species, but the ship's biodampeners made precise location difficult. He would need to get closer to the holding areas, which meant leaving the relative safety of the ventilation system. The opportunity came during the night cycle when guard shifts changed. Jake had memorized their patrol patterns and identified a 30-second window when a particular corridor would be unmonitored. He dropped silently from ceiling grate, his boots making no sound on the metal deck. The holding area was a nightmare that made Jake's blood boil. Rows of cells contained dozens of sentient beings in various stages of the Kythera's processing system. Some still showed defiance in their eyes, while others had already been broken into the hollow compliance that the slavers prized. The smell of fear, despair, and worse things hung heavy in the recycled air. Jake's enhanced hearing picked up whispered conversations between prisoners. Many had given up hope, but others still planned impossible escapes or dreamed of rescue. He made his way carefully between the cell blocks, using his suit's sensors to scan for human genetic markers. He found Sarah in an isolation cell in the maximum security section. Through his suit's optical enhancers, he could see her sitting on the bare metal floor, still showing the proud bearing that had made her such an effective diplomat. She looked thinner than in her official photos, and there were stress lines around her eyes, but her spirit appeared unbroken. Jake couldn't risk direct contact yet. The isolation cells were too heavily monitored, and any disturbance would trigger alarms. Instead, he carefully placed a small metal fragment shaped like Earth's Special Operations insignia into her food delivery slot. The message was simple: help is coming. But as Jake prepared to withdraw, he overheard a conversation that changed everything. 2 Kythera guards were discussing preparations for a special processing session scheduled for the next day. They spoke casually about neural implants, personality restructuring, and the market value of a properly conditioned human diplomat. Time had just run out. Jake spent the rest of the night cycle repositioning himself throughout the ship. He planted microcharges on critical systems, created diversions that would draw guards away from key areas, and prepared multiple escape routes. What he was planning would require perfect timing and no small amount of luck. The processing was scheduled to begin at the start of the day cycle. Jake waited in a maintenance shaft directly above the conditioning chamber, watching through fiber optic cameras as the Kythera prepared their equipment. The chamber was a sterile white room filled with devices that looked more like torture implements than medical equipment. Neural interface cables hung from the ceiling like mechanical serpents, and restraint tables were positioned under banks of sensors and manipulator arms. Sarah was brought in under heavy guard, her hands secured behind her back with energy shackles. Jake had to admire her composure. Even facing the prospect of having her personality erased and rebuilt, she walked with dignity. The Kythera guards seemed almost respectful of her bearing, though it didn't stop them from preparing to destroy everything that made her who she was. Ambassador Chun, Operative Vextor, entered the chamber, his black eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Today you begin your transformation from a failed diplomat to a profitable asset. We've had considerable interest in acquiring a human servant, particularly one with your diplomatic training. My people will come from me, Sarah said quietly. You may not understand human nature yet, but you will. Vextor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your people don't even know you're missing. As far as Earth government knows, you completed your mission successfully and departed for Rigel 7. A regrettable hyperspace navigation error will explain your disappearance. These things happen to primitive species still learning to travel between stars. Jake watched as they forced Sarah onto one of the restraint tables and began attaching the neural interface cables. He had perhaps 30 seconds before the process became irreversible. Time to announce humanity's arrival in galactic politics. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the chamber in hellish red illumination. But Jake was already moving. He dropped through the ceiling panel like a falling shadow, landing silently behind the guard station. His combat knife found the first Kythera's throat before the alien even knew he was there. The second guard spun toward the sound, reaching for his weapon, but Jake was already inside his guard. Enhanced reflexes allowed him to move faster than most aliens could track, and his knife found gaps in the Kythera's protective gear with surgical precision. Vextor backed away from the restraint table, his pale skin even whiter in the emergency lighting. Impossible. Our sensors detected no infiltration. Your sensors are designed to detect ships and large groups, Jake said conversationally as he moved toward the remaining guards. They're not very good at detecting individual humans who don't want to be found. The Kythera commander activated a personal force shield, but Jake had come prepared. The EMP grenade he tossed disrupted local electronics for a 3-meter radius, dropping the shield and plunging that section of the room into total darkness. When the backup systems restored power 2 seconds later, Vextor was on the floor with Jake's knife at his throat. Ambassador Chun, Jake called out without taking his eyes off Vextor. Are you injured? Nothing permanent, Sarah replied, working to free herself from the restraint cables. Though I have to admit, your timing is impeccable. Sorry it took so long. Tracking you through hyperspace isn't exactly something they cover in basic training. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship as Jake's other preparations activated. Explosions echoed from various sections as his charges disabled critical systems. He had targeted life support, navigation, weapons, and communications, not to destroy the ship, but to cripple it and create chaos. We need to reach the escape pods, Jake told Sarah as he secured Vextor's hands with the alien's own energy shackles. But first, we're making a stop at the holding areas. The other prisoners? Sarah asked. Earth doesn't abandon its people, Jake said, but we don't abandon anyone if we can help it. They moved through the ship's corridors as chaos erupted around them. Jake's sabotage had been carefully planned. While he had disabled critical systems, he had been careful not to damage anything that would cause immediate loss of life. The Kythera crew was rushing to contain multiple emergencies, leaving large sections of the ship temporarily unguarded. The holding areas were in pandemonium when they arrived. Prisoners were shouting questions in dozens of languages. Guards were trying to maintain order, and automated systems were announcing emergency procedures. Jake's microcharges had disabled the cell locks throughout the section, but the prisoners were too shocked to take advantage of their sudden freedom. Attention, Sarah called out in her diplomat's voice, somehow making herself heard over the chaos. I am Ambassador Sarah Chan of Earth. This facility is being shut down. All prisoners are to proceed immediately to the escape pod bays. Her words sparked something in the prisoners that mere explosions couldn't. Hope. Beings who had been broken by months or years of captivity suddenly remembered who they had been before. They began moving toward the exits, helping weaker prisoners, and organizing themselves with the instinctive cooperation of the oppressed. But Jake knew their time was running short. The Kythera would rally soon, and when they did, they would fight desperately to protect their investment. He guided Sarah and the stream of former prisoners toward the escape pod bays, while his enhanced senses monitored for pursuit. It came sooner than he had hoped. A squad of Kythera security troops appeared at the far end of the corridor, armed with military-grade energy weapons. Jake pushed Sarah behind cover and returned fire with his own modified pulse rifle, its discharge lighting up the corridor like lightning. The escape pods are just ahead, Jake called over the sound of weapons fire. Get everyone loaded while I hold them off. I'm not leaving you behind, Sarah replied firmly. You're not leaving me behind. I'm covering your exit, then following. It's called tactics. The firefight was brief, but intense. Jake's training and enhanced reflexes gave him an edge, but the Kythera had superior firepower and defensive positions. He was forced to give ground slowly, using every piece of cover and every tactical advantage he could find. By the time Jake reached the escape pod bay, Sarah had organized the evacuation with impressive efficiency. Dozens of beings from across the galaxy were packed into emergency pods designed for much smaller numbers. But nobody complained. Freedom, however cramped, was preferable to slavery. "This is the last pod," Sarah reported as Jake dove through the hatch. "Everyone else has already launched." Jake sealed the hatch just as energy blast began scoring the hull around them. He activated the pod's emergency launch sequence, and they were thrown back in their seats as the small craft shot away from the massive slave ship. Through the pod's tiny viewport, they could see the Harvester hanging in space like a wounded beast. Jake's sabotage had disabled its engines and weapons, but not its life support. The ship would survive, though it would be helpless until rescue arrived. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as they watched the slave ship dwindle behind them. "Now we go home," Jake replied, activating the pod's emergency beacon. "A rescue ship should reach us within 6 hours. I mean, what happens to them?" Sarah gestured toward the ship. "The Kythera?" Jake considered the question. "That depends on what message Earth wants to send to the galaxy." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "What message do you think we should send?" "The same message we always send," Jake replied. "That humanity protects its own, and anyone who threatens our people will face the consequences. But we're not savages. We don't murder helpless prisoners or torture captured enemies. Even after what they did, especially after what they did. The galaxy is watching to see what kind of species humanity really is. Do we want them to see us as another group of predators, or as something better?" As their rescue beacon transmitted Earth's location to the approaching fleet, Jake reflected on the mission. They had successfully rescued Ambassador Chun and freed dozens of other prisoners, but more importantly, they had sent a message to the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the naive newcomer that could be pushed around or ignored. The Kythera Syndicate had wanted to test human resolve by taking one of their diplomats. They had learned that humanity's response to such provocation was swift, precise, and utterly ruthless when necessary. But they had also learned that humans fought by their own rules, showing mercy even to enemies who deserved none. In the distance, Jake could see the approaching lights of Earth's rescue fleet. Soon they would be home, and Sarah would return to her work of building bridges between humanity and the galactic community. But now those negotiations would proceed from a position of strength rather than supplication. The galaxy had learned that humans were not to be underestimated. More importantly, they had learned that humanity had its own code of honor, one that valued both strength and mercy in equal measure. It was a lesson that would reshape the balance of power across known space. The rescue fleet that picked up Jake and Sarah was not the small diplomatic vessel they expected. Instead, 3 massive Earth Navy dreadnoughts materialized out of hyperspace, their hulls bristling with weapons that made the galaxy's military experts recalculate everything they thought they knew about human technology. Admiral Catherine Reeves met them in the flagship's briefing room, her weathered face showing the strain of the past weeks. She had commanded Earth's first interstellar fleet, fought the Centauri border wars, and negotiated humanity's first peace treaties with alien species. But the expression she wore now was unlike anything Sarah had seen before. "Ambassador Chun," the Admiral said formally, "I'm glad you're safe. Your disappearance created quite a stir back home." "Admiral," Sarah replied, still trying to process the size of the military response. "I appreciate the rescue, but surely 3 dreadnoughts are excessive for one missing diplomat?" "Ma'am, with respect, you weren't just any diplomat. You were Earth's first official representative to the Galactic Trade Consortium. When you vanished, it sent a message to every species in known space that humans could be taken with impunity." Commander Morrison stepped forward, his mission report loaded on a holographic display. "Admiral, the Kythera Syndicate isn't just a criminal organization. They're a testing ground. Other species wanted to see how Earth would respond to provocation." Admiral Reeves nodded grimly. "Our intelligence services reached the same conclusion. The Kythera operation wasn't random. It was specifically designed to gauge human resolve. Every major power in the galaxy is watching to see what we do next." Sarah felt a chill as the implication sank in. Her kidnapping hadn't been about slavery or profit. It had been about politics on a scale she could barely comprehend. The entire galactic community was using her situation as a test of Earth's character and capabilities. "What's our official response?" Sarah asked. That's complicated, Admiral Reeves replied. Officially, Earth cannot acknowledge that we sent special forces to rescue you. Commander Morrison's mission never happened. You escaped during a prisoner revolt and commandeered an escape pod. Jake raised an eyebrow. And unofficially? Unofficially, word is already spreading through intelligence networks across the galaxy that Earth sent a single operative to infiltrate a heavily defended slave ship and extract our diplomat. The speculation about your capabilities is causing quite a stir in certain circles. The Admiral activated a holographic display showing various alien news feeds. Sarah watched in fascination as reporters and analysts from dozens of species discussed the mysterious rescue of a human diplomat. The consensus seemed to be that if Earth could mount such a precise operation with minimal resources, they possessed military capabilities far beyond what anyone had estimated. The beauty of it, Admiral Reeves continued, is that we never have to confirm or deny anything. The galaxy's intelligence services will create their own theories about human special operations capabilities. Most of those theories will significantly overestimate our actual abilities. Meaning, Sarah asked, meaning that species who were considering testing Earth's resolve are now having second thoughts. Nobody wants to be the next target of human ninja operatives. Jake couldn't suppress a laugh. Ninja? That's what they're calling us. The Zeltheran intelligence reports describe you as moving like shadows given form, striking without warning, vanishing without trace. Apparently, that translates to ninja in most galactic languages. Sarah shook her head in amazement. So my kidnapping, traumatic as it was, actually strengthened Earth's position? In the short term, yes, Admiral Reeves confirmed. But that creates new problems. Several alien governments are now demanding proof that Earth isn't planning aggressive expansion. They're claiming that any species capable of such precise military operations must be harboring imperial ambitions. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth Command. Admiral Reeves activated the quantum communication array, and President Martinez appeared as a hologram, his expression grave. Admiral, I'm glad Ambassador Chun is safe, but we have a situation developing. The consortium has called an emergency session to address the human question. Apparently, our rescue operation has sparked a galaxy-wide debate about whether Earth poses a threat to galactic stability. Sarah stepped forward. Mr. President, I recommend that I return to my diplomatic duties immediately. We need to address these concerns before they spiral out of control. Absolutely not, President Martinez replied firmly. Sarah, you've been through a traumatic experience. You need time to recover before. With respect, Mr. President, Sarah interrupted, every hour we delay gives our opponents more time to build a case against us. The rescue might have bought us credibility, but it's also painted us as potentially dangerous. I need to get back to the negotiating table and remind everyone that Earth seeks cooperation, not conquest. Admiral Reeves studied the diplomatic data streaming in from various sources. The ambassador has a point, sir. The syndicate operation was designed to make us look weak. Now we're being painted as potentially aggressive. Either way, our consortium membership is in jeopardy. President Martinez was quiet for several moments, weighing options that could determine humanity's future among the stars. Very well, Admiral, escort Ambassador Chun to consortium headquarters immediately. But this time, she goes with a full diplomatic security detail. That might send the wrong message, Sarah protested. If I arrive surrounded by military guards, it confirms their fears about human aggression. Commander Morrison, who had been quietly listening to the exchange, spoke up. What if the security detail isn't visible? I could provide close protection without anyone knowing I'm there. Admiral Reeves looked intrigued. An invisible bodyguard? The consortium delegates are already convinced that Earth has invisible operatives. Why disappoint them? If anything happens to Ambassador Chun, I'll be there to respond. But if everything goes smoothly, no one will ever know I was present. Sarah considered the proposal. She didn't like the idea of needing protection at a diplomatic gathering, but recent events had shown that even supposedly civilized venues could be dangerous. Very well, but only as a last resort. If diplomatic solutions are available, they take priority over military ones. Understood, Mum, je répète. I'll be there to watch your back, not to start fights. The journey to consortium headquarters took them through the heart of galactic civilization. Sarah had never seen such a concentration of different species and technologies in one place. Massive space stations orbited artificial worlds, while ships from 1,000 different cultures moved through carefully controlled traffic patterns. The scale was breathtaking, a testament to what galactic cooperation could achieve. But she could also see the cracks in the facade. Military vessels from various species maintained careful distances from each other, their weapons powered but not targeted. Diplomatic shuttles moved under heavy escort, and the communication channels buzzed with barely concealed tensions. The galaxy was holding its breath, waiting to see whether humanity would prove to be friend or foe. The consortium headquarters itself was a marvel of engineering. A space station the size of a small moon, its architecture blending design elements from dozens of different species. Sarah's diplomatic shuttle was cleared through multiple security checkpoints before being allowed to dock. Each scanner and inspection made her more aware of the galaxy's nervousness about human capabilities. But as they approached the main assembly chamber, Sarah felt her confidence returning. This was her element, the careful dance of diplomacy, the subtle art of building consensus among diverse groups with competing interests. Whatever enhanced capabilities Commander Morrison might possess, this was a job that required human intuition, empathy, and the ability to find common ground. The chamber itself was even more impressive than she remembered from her first visit. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy filled the vast space, their conversations creating a symphony of different languages and communication methods. But as Sarah entered, a noticeable hush fell over the assembly. She was no longer just another hopeful species seeking membership. She was a human who had been captured by slavers and mysteriously rescued by Earth's legendary ninja operatives. Every eye in the chamber was upon her, measuring her response to what she had endured. "Honored delegates," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "I stand before you today not as a victim, but as a witness to both the darkest and brightest aspects of galactic civilization." She spoke without notes, letting her recent experiences guide her words. She described the horror of the Kythera slave operation, the suffering of dozens of species held in captivity, and the systematic exploitation of the weak by those who preyed upon them. But she also spoke of cooperation, how prisoners from different species had worked together during their escape, how former enemies had helped each other reach safety. "The question before us today," Sarah continued, "is not whether Earth poses a threat to galactic stability. The question is whether we will work together to eliminate the real threats, the predators who see sentient beings as commodities to be bought and sold." The response from the assembly was immediate and intense. Some delegates applauded her words, while others seemed concerned by her direct approach. But Sarah could see that she had shifted the conversation away from human military capabilities and toward the broader issues of galactic justice. During the recess that followed her opening statement, delegates approached her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Some wanted to hear details about her captivity, while others seemed more interested in probing for information about Earth's rescue capabilities. "Ambassador Chun," came a familiar voice. Sarah turned to see Coordinator Sarah approaching, her butterfly wings drooping with what looked like shame. "I must apologize for what happened at our previous meeting. The Kythera operation occurred under Zelthran protection, and we bear responsibility for your safety." Sarah studied the alien official, remembering how Sarah had watched her capture without intervening. "Coordinator, I appreciate your words, but I'm more interested in preventing future incidents than assigning blame for past ones. Of course, the Zelthran Empire is prepared to support stronger anti-slavery measures throughout consortium space. We're also interested in learning more about Earth's security capabilities." Sarah smiled diplomatically. "Earth's greatest security capability is our commitment to protecting all sentient beings from exploitation. Everything else is just details." As the session resumed, Sarah found herself at the center of an increasingly complex web of negotiations. Some species wanted to forge closer ties with Earth, hoping to benefit from human military expertise. Others pushed for restrictions on human operations, fearing that Earth's rescue capabilities could be turned toward aggressive purposes. But gradually, a consensus began to emerge around Sarah's central theme: the need for stronger action against slavery and other forms of exploitation. Species that had previously ignored the problem because it didn't affect them directly were now forced to confront the reality of systematic oppression within their own territories. The consortium has operated under the assumption that member species would self-regulate, announced Chancellor Thexmar, the Assembly's senior moderator. Recent events have shown that this approach is insufficient to protect sentient rights across our territories. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but Sarah could see that the tide was turning. Her kidnapping had done more than demonstrate Earth's military capabilities. It had forced the galaxy to confront uncomfortable truths about the systems they had allowed to flourish in the shadows of their civilization. As the day's session concluded, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The rescue might have been dramatic, but the real victory was being won through patient diplomacy and moral persuasion. Earth was proving that they could be both strong enough to protect their interests and wise enough to use that strength for the benefit of all. From somewhere in the chamber's shadows, she knew that Commander Morrison was watching, ready to act if needed. But Sarah was increasingly confident that his skills would not be required. This was a battle that would be won with words and ideas, not weapons and stealth. The galaxy was learning that humanity's greatest weapon was not their mysterious ninja operatives, but their unwavering commitment to justice and cooperation. It was a lesson that would reshape the balance of power across known space. 3 weeks after the consortium emergency session, Sarah Chun found herself facing an entirely different kind of challenge. The galaxy had indeed responded to Earth's demonstration of capability and principle, but not in ways anyone had anticipated. Her rescue had triggered a cascade of events that threatened to reshape the entire political structure of known space. The morning briefing in Earth's new embassy station orbiting consortium headquarters was sobering. Intelligence reports streamed across holographic displays, showing a galaxy in flux. Major powers were realigning their alliances. Minor species were choosing sides, and the Kythera Syndicate had become the focal point of a much larger struggle. The situation is unprecedented, reported Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's chief intelligence analyst. 17 different species have formally requested Earth's assistance in eliminating slavery operations within their territories. But 12 others have accused us of using anti-slavery initiatives as a pretext for military expansion. Sarah reviewed the reports with growing concern. Each request for assistance came with political complications. Some species genuinely wanted to eliminate slavery, but lacked the military capability to confront well-armed criminal organizations. Others seemed more interested in testing Earth's commitment to their stated principles. Still others were clearly trying to maneuver humanity into conflicts with their rivals. What about the Kythera themselves? Sarah asked. Any word on what happened to the Harvester? Commander Morrison, who had officially been assigned as her security advisor, pulled up tactical reports. The ship was found drifting in the Outer Rim 6 days after our escape. The crew had been taken into custody by consortium peacekeepers, and all the disabled systems had been repaired. But here's the interesting part. When authorities boarded the ship, they found detailed records of the entire slaving operation. Records that somehow survived your sabotage. Sarah asked with a raised eyebrow. Jake's expression was carefully neutral. Must have been a malfunction in my charges. Very unfortunate that all that incriminating evidence remained intact. Sarah smiled despite the gravity of the situation. Jake's malfunction had provided the consortium with irrefutable proof of the Kythera's crimes, including client lists, financial records, and operational details spanning decades. The revelations had implicated dozens of supposedly respectable corporations and government officials across the galaxy. The political fallout has been extensive, Dr. Vasquez continued. 3 governments have fallen, and 7 major corporations are facing criminal prosecutions. But it's also created a power vacuum that various factions are trying to fill. Which brings us to today's problem, Sarah said, gesturing to the most urgent report on her desk. The hegemony of Vextar has formally challenged Earth's right to operate in their territory. The hegemony was one of the galaxy's older powers, a confederation of militaristic species that had built their economy on conquest and exploitation. They controlled significant portions of the Outer Rim, including territories where slavery operations had flourished for centuries. Earth's anti-slavery campaign threatened their entire economic model. They're demanding that we cease all operations in disputed territories, Jake noted, reading from the official challenge. And they're backing up their demands with a battle fleet positioned at the edge of consortium space. Sarah had been expecting this confrontation for weeks. The hegemony represented everything that humanity opposed about galactic civilization: the strong preying upon the weak, might making right, and the treatment of sentient beings as property. A clash between Earth and the hegemony was probably inevitable. "What's our military assessment?" Sarah asked. Admiral Reeves appeared via holographic link from Earth Command, her expression grim. "The hegemony fleet is substantial. Nearly 200 warships, including several Dreadnought-class vessels. Our intelligence suggests they're technologically sophisticated and experienced in large-scale military operations." "Numbers?" Jake asked. "They outnumber our available forces 3-1. However, our technological advantages might offset some of that disparity. The question is whether we're prepared for a full-scale interstellar war." Sarah felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. The choice she made in the next few hours could determine whether humanity's future among the stars would be peaceful or perpetually violent. But she also knew that some principles were worth fighting for. "What does Earth Command recommend?" she asked. "President Martinez has authorized limited military action to protect anti-slavery operations," Admiral Reeves replied. "But he's left the tactical decisions to field commanders, meaning you and Admiral Chun." Admiral Lisa Chun, Sarah's cousin and commander of the Consortium Theater, appeared on another holographic display. Her ship, the UES Defiant, was currently stationed at the edge of hegemony space with a small but formidable Earth Navy task force. "The hegemony has given us 48 hours to withdraw from their territory," Admiral Chun reported. "They're claiming that our anti-slavery operations constitute an invasion of their sovereign space." "Any word from the Consortium?" Sarah asked. "Officially, they're calling for diplomatic resolution. Unofficially, most member species are staying as far away from this conflict as possible. Nobody wants to get caught between Earth and the hegemony." Sarah understood their reluctance. For centuries, the Consortium had maintained peace through careful balance between competing powers. Earth's sudden emergence as a major player threatened that stability, but so did open conflict between two heavily armed factions. "I need options," Sarah said. "Military and diplomatic." Jake stepped forward with a tactical analysis. "Militarily, we could strike their slaving operations directly. Hit fast, extract the prisoners, and withdraw before they can respond with their main fleet. It would demonstrate our capabilities without triggering a full-scale war." "Risks?" Sarah asked. "High probability of civilian casualties. If we guess wrong about their defensive capabilities, we could lose entire strike teams. And there's no guarantee that limited action won't escalate to something larger." Admiral Chun provided the military perspective. "A direct confrontation is winnable, but costly. Our ships are more advanced, but they have numerical superiority. We estimate 60 to 70% casualties on both sides if this goes to full battle." "Diplomatic options?" Sarah asked. Dr. Vasquez. "Limited but potentially effective. The hegemony's economy depends on trade with consortium members. If we could convince enough species to impose economic sanctions, we might force them to negotiate without military action. Timeline for economic pressure to take effect? Months, possibly years. And there's no guarantee it would work. The hegemony has alternate trade partners outside the consortium." Sarah studied the reports and analyses, but she already knew what she had to do. The principle that had guided her throughout this crisis was simple. Earth protected its people and didn't abandon those in need. That principle applied whether the people in question were human diplomats or alien slaves. "I'm going to try something that might be completely insane," Sarah announced. "I'm going to challenge the hegemony to negotiate directly." The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Direct negotiation between major powers was extremely rare in galactic politics, usually reserved for ending wars rather than preventing them. "Ambassador," Admiral Reeves said carefully, "the hegemony doesn't exactly have a reputation for diplomatic flexibility. Their usual approach to disagreements is to shoot first and ignore questions later, which is exactly why they might be surprised by a genuine diplomatic overture," Sarah replied. "They're expecting us to respond with military force. If we offer to negotiate instead, it might catch them off balance." Jake looked skeptical. "And if they interpret diplomacy as weakness? Then we'll have learned something important about their intentions, and we'll still have all our military options available. Sarah activated the communication array and sent a formal request for direct diplomatic contact with the hegemony leadership. The response came back within an hour, a terse acceptance of negotiation, along with coordinates for a neutral meeting point in unclaimed space. Well, Sarah said, reviewing the hegemony's reply, at least they're willing to talk. That's more than I expected. The meeting was scheduled for 48 hours later at an abandoned research station in the neutral zone between Consortium and hegemony space. Sarah would attend with a small diplomatic team, while both sides maintained military forces at a respectful distance. As she prepared for what might be the most important negotiation of her career, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been focused on trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Now she was preparing to prevent an interstellar war while protecting the fundamental principle that no sentient being should be treated as property. Second thoughts, Jake asked as he reviewed security protocols for the meeting. Every few minutes, Sarah admitted. But sometimes you have to take risks for what you believe in. The journey to the neutral zone took 12 hours, giving Sarah time to review everything humanity had learned about hegemony politics and culture. They were a coalition of species that had never known democracy, viewing strength as the only legitimate basis for authority. Their leaders were chosen through combat trials, their policies decided by Council of War Chiefs, and their diplomacy conducted under the shadow of ever-present military threat. But they were also pragmatists who understood the value of negotiation when the alternatives were too costly. Sarah hoped to appeal to that pragmatism while demonstrating that Earth's principles were not a sign of weakness, but a different kind of strength. The abandoned research station was a relic from the early days of galactic exploration, a massive structure that had once housed thousands of scientists studying cosmic phenomena. Now it served as a neutral meeting ground, its empty corridors echoing with the footsteps of delegates who hoped to prevent those corridors from being filled with the sounds of war. The hegemony delegation arrived precisely on schedule, their ship a sleek predator designed for battle rather than diplomacy. Sarah watched through the station's viewing ports as their shuttle approached, noting the elegant but threatening lines of their vessel. The hegemony negotiating team was led by War Chief Krexanel, a massive reptilian being whose scarred hide testified to decades of combat. His retinue included representatives from each major species in the hegemony, all of them carrying themselves with the assured confidence of those accustomed to having their way through force. Ambassador Chun. War Chief Krexanel's voice was a low rumble that seemed to shake the station's bulkheads. You have requested negotiation. Speak. Sarah had prepared extensively for this moment, but facing the hegemony delegation in person was still intimidating. These were beings who had built an empire through conquest and maintained it through strength. They saw diplomacy as a tool of the weak, compromise as surrender. War Chief Krexanel, Sarah began formally, I come before you today not as an enemy, but as a representative of a species that values both strength and justice. Earth seeks no territory in hegemony space, no interference in your internal affairs. We ask only that you respect our commitment to ending the exploitation of sentient beings throughout the galaxy. Krexanel's laugh was like grinding stone. You speak of justice as if it were something that exists independent of power. Justice is what the strong impose upon the weak. Your species is young and naive if you believe otherwise. Perhaps, Sarah replied calmly, but our naivety has proven surprisingly effective. We freed dozens of slaves from the Kithira operation without firing a shot in anger. We've convinced 17 species to voluntarily eliminate slavery from their territories. Sometimes principle achieves what force cannot. The war chief studied her with ancient eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. Your rescue of a single diplomat was impressive, I grant you. But do you truly believe that one success makes you our equals? I believe, Sarah said carefully, that strength comes in many forms. The hegemony has built its power through conquest. Earth has built its strength through cooperation. Both approaches have their merits, but both also have their limitations. What do you propose? Krexanel asked, though his tone suggested he expected disappointment. Sarah activated a holographic display showing the disputed territories. We propose a partition of operations. The hegemony maintains sovereignty over all territories where you currently exercise control. Earth will limit its anti-slavery operations to unclaimed space and regions where local governments have specifically requested our assistance. The war chief considered this for several moments. And what guarantee do we have that your operations won't expand into our territory? The same guarantee you give us that your forces won't attack our operations in neutral space. Mutual respect for clearly defined boundaries and the understanding that violation of those boundaries would mean war. It was a delicate balance, acknowledging the hegemony's strength while establishing limits on their expansion. Sarah was essentially proposing a Cold War rather than a hot one, but it was a Cold War with rules that both sides could accept. The negotiation continued for hours, with both sides probing for weaknesses while seeking acceptable compromises. Gradually, the outlines of an agreement began to emerge, not a peace treaty, but a framework for coexistence that acknowledged both Earth's principles and the hegemony's power. As the talks progressed, Sarah began to understand something important about her opponents. They were not monsters, despite their harsh methods. They were beings who had learned that the galaxy was a dangerous place where the weak were devoured by the strong. Their cruelty was not born of sadism, but of survival in a hostile universe. But they were also curious about Earth's different approach. The idea of building strength through cooperation rather than conquest was so alien to their experience that they found it fascinating. Several times, Crexenel asked probing questions about how human society functioned without constant internal warfare. When the negotiations finally concluded, both sides had achieved something unexpected. Not just an agreement, but a grudging respect for each other's capabilities and convictions. The hegemony would respect Earth's anti-slavery operations in neutral space, while Earth would acknowledge hegemony's sovereignty in their established territories. This agreement will not last forever, War Chief Crexenel warned as they prepared to depart. Our philosophies are too different for permanent peace. Perhaps, Sarah replied, but it will last long enough for both our species to learn from each other. Sometimes that's the most diplomacy can achieve. As the hegemony delegation returned to their ship, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had prevented a war, but at the cost of accepting a galaxy where slavery would continue to exist in hegemony space. It was a compromise that would satisfy neither human idealists nor hegemony hardliners. But it was also a foundation upon which something better might eventually be built. The galaxy had seen that Earth was strong enough to stand against the hegemony, but wise enough to seek peace when war could be avoided. It was a reputation that would serve humanity well in the challenges to come. 1 year after the hegemony accords, Ambassador Sarah Chun stood in the observation deck of humanity's newest achievement, Sanctuary Station, the galaxy's first refuge for freed slaves and trafficked beings. The massive station orbited a blue giant star in neutral space, its curved spires and gardens visible through the transparent aluminum walls. What had begun as a desperate rescue mission had evolved into something that was reshaping galactic civilization. The numbers are quite remarkable, Dr. Vasquez reported, reviewing the latest statistics. In 12 months, we've processed over 40,000 individuals through the rehabilitation programs. Representatives from 37 species, ranging from kidnapped diplomats to multi-generational slaves who had never known freedom. Sarah watched as a group of young Cormac played in the station's central garden, their rocky skin gleaming as they chased holographic butterflies through carefully maintained ecosystems. 6 months ago, those same children had been chained in processing centers, marked for sale to mining operations on the rim worlds. Now they were learning to read, play, and dream of futures beyond mere survival. What's the integration success rate? Sarah asked. 83% are successfully returning to their home species or establishing new lives in consortium territory, Jake reported. He had formally transferred to diplomatic security, but still maintained his connections with Earth's special operations community. The remaining 17% are choosing to stay here permanently, either as staff or as permanent residents. Sanctuary Station had become more than just a refugee center. It was a symbol of humanity's commitment to galactic justice, a proof that Earth's principles could be translated into practical action. But it had also become a target for those who profited from the systems it challenged. Security report? Sarah asked. 3 attempted infiltrations this month, Jake replied grimly. All unsuccessful, but the attempts are becoming more sophisticated. Someone is probing our defenses very carefully. The station's defensive systems were a carefully balanced combination of military capability and diplomatic neutrality. Earth Navy ships patrolled the surrounding space, but under strict rules of engagement designed to avoid unnecessary escalation. The station itself was armed, but its weapons were designed for defense rather than offense. Any indication of who's behind the probes? Sarah asked. Working Theory is a coalition of interests affected by our anti-slavery operations, Dr. Vasquez replied. Criminal syndicates, corrupt corporations, possibly even government officials from species that haven't officially endorsed the rehabilitation programs. Sarah wasn't surprised. Sanctuary Station's success had created ripple effects throughout the galaxy's economy. Entire industries built on cheap slave labor were being forced to restructure. Legitimate businesses were gaining competitive advantages, and political systems based on exploitation were facing pressure for reform. But the station had also created unexpected alliances. Species that had never cooperated before were working together to support the rehabilitation programs. Former enemies were finding common ground in their shared commitment to protecting sentient rights. Speaking of unexpected developments, Dr. Vasquez continued with a slight smile. We have a visitor requesting permission to dock. War Chief Crexanael of the Hegemony. Sarah raised an eyebrow. The Hegemony leader's arrival was both surprising and concerning. The Accords had established a stable ceasefire between Earth and the Hegemony, but relations remained cool and formal. Crexanael had never before visited consortium space, let alone a humanitarian facility. Is he here officially or personally? Sarah asked. That's unclear. His request simply states that he wishes to observe the station's operations firsthand. Jake immediately shifted to security mode. Ma'am, this could be a reconnaissance mission. Or worse, a pretext for some kind of action against the station. Or, Sarah said thoughtfully, it could be genuine curiosity. We've both learned over the past year that simple assumptions about alien motivations are often wrong. The decision to allow Crexanael to visit was not taken lightly. After extensive consultation with Earth Command and the Consortium Council, Sarah agreed to receive the Hegemony leader under strict diplomatic protocols. His ship would be allowed to dock, but only after submitting to comprehensive security scans. His retinue would be limited to essential personnel, and their movements within the station would be carefully monitored. When the Hegemony vessel arrived 2 days later, Sarah was struck by how different it looked from the predatory warship she remembered from their first meeting. The diplomatic transport was still clearly military in design, but its weapons were powered down, and its approach was respectful of station protocols. Crexanael himself seemed different as well. The massive reptilian being still carried himself with the authority of a war leader, but Sarah detected something new in his demeanor, perhaps uncertainty or even curiosity. War Chief, Sarah greeted him formally as he emerged from his shuttle. Welcome to Sanctuary Station. What brings you to neutral space? Ambassador Chun, Crexanael replied with what might have been respect. I come see for myself what you have built here. The reports from our intelligence services seemed improbable. Sarah decided to take him at face value. Then, let me show you what interspecies cooperation can accomplish when it's focused on helping rather than exploiting. The tour that followed was unlike any diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Sarah guided the leader of a militaristic empire through facilities dedicated to healing the wounds that such empires created. They visited medical centers where former slaves received treatment for both physical and psychological trauma. They observed educational programs where beings from dozens of species learned new skills and prepared for independent lives. But, most importantly, they met the residents themselves. Crexanael spoke with a Zelthran engineer who had been kidnapped for her expertise in biotechnology. He listened to a vegan philosopher who had spent years in mental conditioning programs designed to break his will. He watched children from his own species play together, children who had been rescued from breeding programs designed to produce stronger slaves. This individual, Crexanael said, stopping before an elderly Hegemony citizen who was teaching crafts to refugee children. She is one of our own people. How did she come to be here? The old being looked up from her work with children clustered around her. I was taken from my home 40 years ago, War Chief, sold to work in the deep mines. When the humans found our transport, I thought I would die in another place of suffering. Instead, I found peace. Crexanael studied the scene with an expression Sarah couldn't read. The idea that citizens of his own empire could be enslaved seemed to challenge his fundamental assumptions about how the galaxy operated. She could return to hegemony space if she chose, he asked Sarah quietly. Of course, everyone here is free to leave whenever they wish. About 30% of our residents do eventually return to their original homes, but many choose to stay and help others who are still healing. As the tour continued, Sarah began to understand why Crexanael had really come. The war chief was not just observing humanitarian operations. He was trying to understand how such operations were possible. The concept of using resources to help the weak rather than exploit them was so foreign to hegemony, thinking that he needed to see it personally to believe it existed. Your species confuses us, Crexanael admitted as they reached the station's main observation deck. You possess the strength to conquer, yet you choose to heal. You could dominate through fear, yet you seek cooperation. It defies everything we understand about survival among the stars. Sarah considered her response carefully. Perhaps that's because we define survival differently. The hegemony sees survival as the triumph of the strong over the weak. Humanity sees survival as the thriving of all sentient beings. And you believe this approach will prove superior in the long term? I believe, Sarah said, that a galaxy where every species is free to develop its full potential will be stronger than one where most species are held back by exploitation and fear. Crexanael was quiet for several minutes, watching the flow of activity through the station's transparent corridors. Beings from dozens of species worked together, learned together, healed together. It was a vision of galactic civilization that bore no resemblance to anything in hegemony experience. There is something I must tell you, Crexanael said finally. The intelligence probes targeting your station, they're not being conducted by the hegemony. Sarah felt a chill of concern. If the hegemony wasn't behind the security threats, then who was? We have become aware of a coalition forming among certain criminal elements, the war chief continued. Species and organizations that profit from the slave trade are pooling their resources to eliminate what they see as an existential threat to their business model. Meaning that Sanctuary Station has become too successful. It's inspiring too many species to follow your example, creating too much pressure for reform. There are factions within the galaxy that would prefer to destroy what you've built rather than allow it to continue spreading. Jake stepped forward. What kind of threat are we talking about? Coordinated attacks on multiple fronts, Crexanael replied grimly. Military strikes, economic sabotage, political pressure on consortium members to withdraw their support. They intend to prove that your humanitarian approach is unsustainable in the face of organized opposition. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Sanctuary Station wasn't just a refugee center anymore. It was a symbol of everything humanity stood for among the stars. If it fell, it would send a message to the galaxy that exploitation and cruelty would always triumph over cooperation and justice. Why are you telling us this? Sarah asked. The hegemony has no official alliance with Earth. Crexanael's expression was unreadable, but his tone carried a note of something that might have been respect. Because over the past year, I have watched your species do something I thought impossible. You have shown strength without cruelty, power without oppression. Perhaps there is something to be learned from your approach. The conversation that followed was unlike any diplomatic exchange in galactic history. The leader of a militaristic empire and the ambassador of a humanitarian species discussed strategies for protecting the innocent and stopping those who would profit from suffering. They didn't agree on methods or philosophy, but they had found common ground in opposition to those who saw sentient beings as mere property. The hegemony cannot openly support your operations, Crexanael explained. Our own people would see it as weakness, but we can share intelligence about the coalition forming against you. And if attacks come from criminal elements operating in neutral space, the hegemony might find it necessary to patrol those regions for entirely unrelated security reasons, Sarah finished with understanding. It was a delicate arrangement that allowed both sides to maintain their principles while working toward a common goal. The hegemony would not officially endorse Earth's humanitarian mission, but they would not stand idle while criminal organizations threatened galactic stability. As Crexanael prepared to depart, he paused at the docking bay entrance. Ambassador, I have spent my life believing that strength comes from dominance, that survival requires the exploitation of the weak. Your station has shown me that there might be other sources of strength. War Chief, Sarah replied, The strongest societies are those where every individual is free to contribute their unique gifts. Perhaps someday our species will find ways to combine hegemony strength with human compassion. The next few months would test that possibility as the coalition of criminal interests launched their campaign against Sanctuary Station and everything it represented. But for the first time since humanity had ventured into galactic politics, they would not face the challenges alone. The galaxy was learning that some principles were worth defending, and some fights were too important to abandon. Earth had started as the naive newcomer seeking acceptance among ancient civilizations. Now, they had become the moral center around which a new kind of galactic community might eventually form. The slave ship that had captured one human diplomat had triggered a transformation that none of them could have imagined. In trying to test Earth's resolve, the Kythera Syndicate had awakened something that would reshape the very foundations of galactic civilization. And somewhere in the depths of space, humanity's ninja operatives continue their quiet work of liberation, proving that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through conquest, but through the simple insistence that every sentient being deserves to be free.